Okay, good morning everybody. I'm just checking the sound is okay after last week's fiasco. I'm making sure we're all good. I've got on 2 minutes early just to check it's all good. Okay, it's very loud and echoey for me this morning because I'm back in a prison wing. Perfect, right, there we are. Shall I get started, Officer G?
Yes, sir.
Shall I start? Okay, yeah. Perfect, right. Okay, good morning everybody. I'm just seeing the comments fly through. I know you can hear me. I'm sure you can hear me, it's all clear. Let me know if it's not. So welcome, good morning everybody. It is a little bit different for us today because we are open. We're open to the public. So we are live, so we have actually people here. Here's a child that I stole this morning. No, this is actually my daughter, so she's here with me this morning. There are people above me I can see up on the landings. There's some people downstairs. There's people just wandering around in general, so it's a little bit different for us. So bear with us because Officer Goodwin may have to move around a little bit just to still social distance as people come past. But we're going to get started in a second. I'm trying to think what plugs I need to do. I've got Harriet over there, our sales and marketing director, as per normal. I'm looking at her for... No, she's not giving me any signals at all. So we're obviously open, so you can obviously come visit us now. It's 7 days a week. We open at 10, we close at 5. We will be we're open at the moment for self-guided tours and for ghost tours. That's here and at Shepton Mallet. We open for guided tours on the 18th and escape rooms. And then we open the activities area, which is our angel and our axe throwing and our kids archery, all opens on the 1st of August and will be fully open 1st of August with everything basically running then. So that will all be going. The paranormals are back. We're very excited about the paranormals back. Most Haunted will be here this weekend. They are here with Carl and Yvette and Stuart, so they'll have a celebrity night here this weekend. And then they're back on the 24th as well with all the other paranormals coming back from the beginning of August. So again, if you're into your paranormal side of things, then obviously you can start doing those. And Lauren and myself and Stacey, so I'm just tweaking the sound. Lauren and myself and Stacey are going to go live on the 18th. So in between the two paranormals, we're going to do our lives as we have been doing. So we'll be doing the lockdowns behind bars once again on the 18th. I think that's it for me. I've talked too much.
You're a chatterbox.
I am a chatterbox. You're absolutely right, Mr. G. Should we get you set up and get you going?
When you're ready, sir.
You need to get a microphone. do you know what? Everything's gone out the window now. We've been so well, we make it look so good, I think, but it's worked really well for the last few weeks. And now that we're open, we're in a completely different world, and it's all just going to go God knows where. Please do continue to throw your questions in as you have them, and obviously I'll build them up and I will jump in and I will throw them at Officer Goodwin as we go. So, with a little bit of luck. I can see Officer G. Actually, let me just give everyone the cameras quickly so they can see what we've got. So obviously there's a camera for me, which is great. There's a camera covering the entire wing that you can see there. There's a camera covering the upstairs. There's one covering down at the bottom of the wing. There's one covering the servery where Officer Goodwin will go in a bit. And then obviously there is Officer Goodwin's camera. So there you are. Do you want to give me some volume?
Testing.
Once more.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, got you all good. Okay, it is all yours, Officer G.
Excellent. Thanks, Joel. Actual fact, we're right back now at the beginning of the very first episode that we did. We started off on A-Wing, but today we're going to go into more detail about things that went on A-Wing and some of those things. I just give you a general overview of A-Wing and its Victorian times all the way up to the way that it was when it closed. Just before I start on those sort of more detailed things, one of the things that Joel forgot to mention, no offence, Joel, however, we also use these buildings for production companies, and we've had many of some of the best production companies coming through here. You'll probably notice just there, you'll see the door, and on it says Rick's Cell, BBC, Holby City. And they came in, they were here for about 9 or 10 days, filming a scene at a time when one of the main actors in Holby City ended up coming to prison. Obviously in the storyline, of course. Up on the fours, that's the fours landing, that's the fourth landing up the top there. Cell number 17 was a cell where David Platt, the character from Coronation Street, was held. So there's all that up there. There's also, we've had Lucky Man filmed in here, and we've had many other production companies coming in to do bits and pieces, and even music videos have been produced in prisons and such like. So so we do a lot of other stuff.
Can I interject on that bit? Because if I don't, I can see Harriet with her hand up. Because you're absolutely right. We do loads and loads of productions for big professional organisations, productions, but we do also bring in like YouTubers. But specifically, we really love working with students that are studying in media and production and stuff like that. And students can come in and they can do their films that they would be doing for their university degrees and stuff, and they can use the backdrop of the prison. And we have a special agreement, if you will, for students and such. So if you're a student, you want to film in prison, let us know.
Exactly. Okay then, so we're just going to move on now and talk something a little bit more about cells in detail. You'll notice just there, I'm going to pull the door to, so you'll have to excuse me moving around the camera a little bit. Pull the door to, you'll see that that's an old wooden door, and that's the original Victorian wooden doors that were in this prison. Nearly all the doors in this prison and other prisons that are of a Victorian style would have been changed to become steel doors, and there's a reason for that, which I'll explain in a minute. These old wooden doors, solid enough, nothing wrong with them at all. However, we had to change. Now that is where you'll very often see in the old films where they're doing that, coming along and spying through. They're actually called Judases, and that will obviously be a connection when you think of the Victorian times to Judas the spy, going back into religious biblical times and all that. So it's called the Judas. You can flip it back and see just about everything in the cell, believe it or not, and there's an even tinier hole just in the centre, and that allows staff to observe in that cell, sometimes when prisoners are unaware, and it's about just keeping on top of it, because once you pull that back, they can hear that, they know that you're looking in on them. So there is a tiny little pinhole just there as well. Just to the side of the cell, it's a little bit difficult to see, to be honest with you, but there's a difference in brickwork there. Got it? And when the Victorians built this, obviously there were no electricity in the cells, so that used to be a hole that went back to a slot, a little bit like in castles for what they call it, bowmen, arrows and stuff like. So that was basically there. And at a certain time at night, a candle would be placed in there and lit, and there would only be one prisoner in those cells. These prisons were built for one prisoner in the Victorian times, and they would sit with their back to that little slot, and the cast light would be where they would read the Bible. But the only book that prisoners were ever allowed to read in those days would have been the Bible. And at a certain time, the staff at night time would have come along, taken the candles out, and there was a blocker, a wooden blocker that could be pulled down onto that, and that was basically to stop prisoners peering out onto the landings. Not that they would have seen much, but that was about isolation. These cells were about isolation. It's difficult to see inside them without the cameras, but the windows are always high up, really high up, and that's because they were never designed to be looked out of. And the reality is they were designed there to create a wall in front of you and just to let light and fresh air into the building. It was about isolation in these cells. So that's the brickwork there. I'm not quite sure when they decided to move on to electricity, but I would assume it might have been in probably the 1900s, the early 1900s, when they decided to put electric in the cells. Just another small detail. This is now the light switch system. Basically, they'll see a switch there. That's for staff. And when that light is switched down, if the prisoners have switched their main light off in the cell, we can still put that light on, and it's a much lower light, but it's light enough for us to look in the cell during the night, during the daytimes when it's dark, so that we can just observe into the cell. And that may be when you think of times when prisoners are on what they call self-harm watches. There's a need that we may need to be watching them consistently throughout the night. It's without a low light, so it doesn't disturb them in the middle of the night. Waking somebody up is not going to work particularly well all the time with bright lights. And they'll be in there with another prisoner, and you're only wanting to observe the one, so That's just what they call a night light. We call it night light. You'll see the red button.
Sorry, Officer G, you do counts during the night, don't you? So obviously when you take over from the day shift, you do a count, make sure you've got all of your prisoners, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then you do another count throughout the evening. Will you count them again throughout the night?
It's not quite like that. There's a shutdown time and an open time in a prison. When we come on to night shifts, the day staff or the evening staff would have counted the prison, locked the prisoners up, and then the night shift staff will do the count again. No day shift staff go home until night shift staff have counted and the numbers tally. Once that's done, they're relatively happy then for the night. And the first count will take place at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then another count takes place at about 6:30 when the day staff come on, just to make sure that the numbers are right before the night staff. But a prison will be counted 4 or 5 or up to 6 times throughout the day, from that time in the morning till that last time at the night time. And it usually happens sometimes at lunch times, at evening meals, at times when prisoners are back on the wing and they may be behind their doors again. So this system, it's an emergency system. Inside there, the prisoners have a button they can press, and pressing that button will put the lights on. It sets a little alarm off. It's not particularly loud. It just goes beep, beep, beep. And in a wing of this size, it's a little bit like Chinese torture, because these things are going all day. Somebody is pressing one of these buttons all day long. Up on by the officers, there's a bit of a monitor there that we can see exactly which cell. They're designed for emergencies. So if you've got somebody that may have harmed themselves or have got serious need of assistance, we can see where it is quickly. There's a time limit on these. You can't just ignore these and just say, well, I'll get to it when I feel like it. In this prison, I believe, after about 3 to 4 minutes, or 2 to 3 minutes, if I remember rightly, these used to double in speed. So they'd go from beep, beep to beep, 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 beep. And after about 5 minutes, they'd come on a permanent beep, beep. And obviously then the control room, where the cameras and all the control of the prison goes on, they would alert a member of staff on the wing and say, that bell needs to be answered, and it needs to be answered now. So that's what it's there for. It does get abused. They do get abused. I've had prisoners ring these buttons, because particularly when they could smoke here, hey boss, any chance I could get a light for me cigarette? Or any chance I could get some Rizzlers, that's cigarette papers and stuff like that. There are all kinds of measures that staff can take, like warning system. We operate what they call a 3 strikes and out warning system, minor offences. So there is ways we can manage that. If need be, of course. So that's that system there. You'll notice the fuse box up here. Fuse boxes are low fused rated. When they put power in the cells, way back, well, not until the mid-90s, we put toilets in the cells by 1995. We also then put power in the cells. That's a point in time when prisoners could have electric radios. They could also get access to TVs, which today they still rent from the prison service at 50p per prisoner per week. They're also given a little kettle, and that kettle is so they can boil water, and they can now access hot drinks when they're behind their doors, something they couldn't do before. Now the problem with boiling water, as you can well imagine, it makes a very easy, convenient weapon, and it is used, and sometimes they'll get sugar and mix sugar in with it, and it makes it really thick, really gluey, and if they throw that at somebody, you just know it's going to be possibly permanent damage. In prisons, they give it the nickname of being napalmed, for all those who understand how napalm bombs used to work. Not particularly pleasant at all, as you can well imagine. So that's the stuff that they get in cells. If you're going into a modern prison now, somewhere like HMP Berwyn, you'll find that the cells have showers in them, they have TVs in them, they have telephones fitted in them. Something that the prison service are doing on an ongoing basis is equipping all cells with telephones, and they will have I suppose it's a bit like a laptop. It's a thing where they can access internal systems. There's no internet based on it, so they can do applications. They can find out information, possibly about the rules or regulations about what's going on in the prison, possibly making orders for their canteen. As far as canteen goes, prisoners used to go to a little shop when I first came here and spend their wages that they'd earned throughout the week. Now it's all done by mail order, and has been done for many, many years by a private company. Prisoners fill in a sheet, it gets sent away, it gets packed into clear plastic bags, brought in on a certain day of the week, and the prisoner inspects it while it's in the bag before they unseal it, and then they sign for it, and away they go back to their cells with their goods, stuff like that.
Officer Goodwin, sorry. It's just, I think, seeing as you're talking about electric and boiling water and stuff. Now, it's true, I understand from speaking to ex-prisoners that were here pre those days where they had kettles, that they used to take the wires out of the light sockets, pull them down, connect them to a razor blade, drop it into a cup of cold water, and let it heat up, basically, to have a warm cup of tea.
Oh, absolutely, yes. They've got a lot of time to think their way around these things. So if they could find some way of exposing, the lights are now sealed and secured, of course, but sometimes if they could get behind the power, they would literally get 2 radio wires and attach them to the old-style razor blades, or the little safety razor blades they used to take out, and it's alive. And they used to dip it in the cup and just wait until the water boiled. Or they electrocuted themselves.
it's
one of those things,
it's amazing what you can come up with when you have nothing but time.
But these are low fuse, so there's a real system in here that doesn't allow a huge amount of power to be run at the same time. Sometimes with the kettle and the TV on, you'll find sometimes the power will pop, and they'll ring their bell to ask you if you can flick the switch back on. But remember, when we move to steel doors, there is a huge danger that if you've got something wired up to a steel door and you put your hand on the handle, it's not going to be a bit of a kick.
They're hollowed inside, aren't they, your steel doors? So they're 2 steel plates.
Yeah, but the reality is it's still got an electrical connection and you're the earth point. So it's low fuse, so you might get a bit of a kick, but it certainly would just blow the fuse pretty quick. They're very low rated fuses, stuff like that.
Chantel's just asked, actually, which is whilst we're still on that point. Sorry, Gemma, yes, you can absolutely get around the prison with a pram. It is extremely wide, as you can see. Well, you'll see in a second, but it is really wide doors and such. You can get around in a pram or a wheelchair without any issues. Chantel's asked whether anybody at Shrewsbury ever had water and sugar thrown on them whilst you were working here.
I don't remember sugar and water, I must be honest, but I do remember boiling water on a number of occasions. I think that's what she means, boiling water. But I do remember specifically once it happened to a member of staff up on the Fours landing. One day, a number of prisoners decided to see if they could get the keys off an officer. The officer was knocked to the floor, and he happened to went down on his keys on his side and struggled to stay in that position to stop prisoners accessing his keys. Now, at the same time, another officer was coming to his assistance. Another prisoner stepped out of a cell with it and threw it at the officer that was coming to his assistance. Sort of relatively fortunately, he was far enough away that the water took out most of its serious heat. Because it cools down very quickly coming through the air. But the officer still got quite badly burnt, but still carried on doing what he was doing. Obviously, it took probably took seconds to get other staff up off the other landings to get to assist those members of staff up there. So yes, it can be used, and it is used and still used today.
Well, it happened when I remember when we first took over here nearly 5 years ago now. That when we first took over nearly 5 years ago, there was another prison where that had happened to a young officer who'd just come out of training. A prisoner had done it. I think that prisoner ended up getting sort of 4 or 5 years added to his sentence, because I remember we used to talk about it on the tour.
I mean, it's one of those things we've always said. When prisoners have had access to boiling water in cell, there is going to be an increase. There is going to be an increase in the violence for those prisoners, and not by any stretch of the imagination are prisoners violent or all violent, but there are those elements that still will use these weapons as their first choice because they're convenient and they're just there for them. So it does increase that risk of those things happening to staff and other prisoners, of course. I'm just going to move across now and explain something about the doors, because you'll notice, where am I standing now? You can't see it there, you can't see it there. So we're going to move across to one of the steel doors.
17, yeah, so 17.
And then you'll be able to see.
Spin that camera around, ask the prisoners to move.
I'm also the key. I'm also the key. What is it? The key grip or the key cameraman mover?
Perfect. Go back to where you were. Go back to right a little bit. Right a little bit. Right a little bit. Perfect. Stop. Right there. Yeah. Perfect.
That's it.
Yeah. Perfect.
No floor markers, as you can see. No spots.
We've watched the BBC do this so many times in ITV and loads of productions.
Now there came a time when they had to change most of the doors, or nearly all the doors in prisons, to the steel doors that we see here. It has a much larger flap, so it's easier to observe the prisoners without having to put your eye close to that little spy hole, because there was a danger if there was no glass in that spy hole, you might put your eye to it and it may be the only chance that you get. There are no second chances if something very sharp is coming out at you. It used to be a habit like breathing for staff. When they went to put their hand on that little flap, they would literally put it and draw their thumb over the glass to make sure it was still in place as they pulled the flap back. So you can see, but these just make it, you can do an observation from further away, stuff like that. So that's the reason there. One of the other things you'll notice, they're in all prisons these days, this little centerpiece here. They're called inundation points. They're, when I say relatively new, about 20 odd years, and that's because of cell fires. In this case of a cell fire, you must remember they weren't available in the old doors. You would have to get to that door. You would have to find some way of getting through the door, and that's if the prisoner in there hadn't barricaded the door to get through. So you can imagine how difficult that might be if they decided to set fire to the cell and barricade their doors and get into those cells to get those people out. So they brought out the steel doors. What you can do is take that little yellow plastic thing out, and there's a special tool and a hose reel will then lock into that, and it just switch it on and it sprays high pressure spray hoses all throughout the cell and puts the fire out long, because the big danger of cell fires, particularly down on the lower landings, is where does smoke go? Smoke rises, it comes out to these doors, rises up the landings, it goes up through the vents in the cells, and it's going into other prisoners' cells. Remember, there's no handle on their side of the door, so they might panic, and I don't blame them. I'd panic too. Particularly on nights. On nights, there are only 2 officers on this wing to 350 prisoners, so if we do get cell fires, they're very, very high-risk situations to have to manage. But that makes a big, big difference. And the other thing that they did with these cells, for a number of reasons, one would be to access a cell in case there is a fire very quickly to deal with it after that, just in case the prisoner had barricaded, and the other one was to do with hostage situations. I think last week I touched on hostage situations. If you've got a situation where a prisoner has got a hostage behind there, whether it be another prisoner or a member of staff, you're now stepping into a completely different world. You're not going to be going in there breaking doors down. Because by the time you've done that, they could have done a huge amount of damage. But we brought in a system, and it's called the Antibarricade door now, because if necessary, at least while we're doing something, there's a switch. It's difficult to see here. I'm going to push the door open. When we push the door open, first of all, we wouldn't have done that normally, but there's a steel bar. You might be able to see it just there. And that stops the door opening outwards, but I knew this would happen, Joel. You told me it wouldn't happen.
I said you were a big, strong lad, and you'd be fine with it.
This door now, obviously, we'd have done that when the door was still locked, and now we can open the door outwards. It's a bit stiff at the moment. It comes quite square back there, and it makes a huge difference. Now we can access the cell much, much quicker. Even in a barricade situation, if there's somebody barricaded there, we can see better what it is we've got to manage and deal with that situation. So they do make a big, big difference. So they're called anti-barricade doors.
Sorry, because and again, I've obviously had the advantage of I've listened to this. Leave it open, Mr. G, and we'll get Lauren down here in a little while. She can close it over. But I've obviously heard this before, but. Is it, well, it's true that with the old style prison cells, what would have happened is prisoners potentially would have barricaded themselves in there, or they could have taken hostages, and they would have taken things like they would have tried to work the beds off the floor and basically built almost like a barricade between the door and the wall, yes, and put the hostage in between. So if you push that door open with the big vices, you're effectively going to squash the hostage.
They build a pressure plate in there so that if the prisoners jam between, they go, if you kick this door open, that was with the old doors. Yeah. If you try to smash this door, because we used to use a big hydraulic jack on the old wooden doors to punch the door in. Yeah. But if you've got somebody squeezed in there like your hostage, you can see the risks that are going to be taken with that. So it saves huge amounts. So it does make a big, big difference. There's still difficult situations to manage, of course. We mustn't assume because we can open this door outwards that that's it. They all give up and say, hey, fair cop, boss, I give up. It doesn't work like that. Some prisoners that have got not so much hostage situations, but they are difficult. Sometimes you've got situations where they're prepared. If we need to go into a cell for whatever reason to remove a prisoner, they're willing to take you on. They're willing to take you on. So we never go in these cells to arrest a prisoner, as we say, we never go in with less than 3 staff. It's called C&R, Control and Restraint. And basically all staff are trained in control and restraint. They have to do the training every 12 months to keep themselves up to date, and they're going to go in there and restrain the prisoner. And once that prisoner is restrained, and you can imagine there's not a lot of space in these cells, you might be restraining the 2 prisoners that are in there. So that means you've got to get 6 staff in there one way or the other. And that means people do end up on the floor. People can get injured because of the lack of movable space.
Not 6 staff looking like you do. 6 staff fully geared up, riot gear, effectively shields, batons, the works.
Yeah, we're going to go in with some protection. We've got helmets and stuff. It's fairly light protection, but it's enough. You've got to stay flexible, so you can't walk in there like, with steel armoured plating everywhere. And then when the prisoners are restrained in there, they will be handcuffed at that point and taken away. They're going to go down to the segregation originally, and then the governor decides what happens after that event, of course. So that's the reason why they've changed these doors.
Yeah, and now, and again, because I was fortunate enough, we've obviously got Shepton Mallet Prison, as you all know, and I've been down to Shepton Mallet Prison when actually the police came to do riot training. So normally in a prison environment, it's a tornado team, which is specially trained prison officers will get brought together and go to a prison to effectively do a situation. But
I've been to a number of riots within my 38-year career, and I've never seen a police officer step to the door in riot gear. Never.
They haven't.
Because the news, when you see the news, they have sometimes, they're not so bad now, but they used to always say, the police are all waiting to go in, because they look like police when they're dressed up with their number. It's not. It's always prison staff. It's always prison staff. They operate what they call the tornado teams. Every prison takes a group of officers that go away and train and do that extra training for riot control and all those incidents that might take place. And then if there is a shout out, as they call it, in another prison because one of the wings have gone off or the prison is getting into a riot situation, those teams will come from all the different prisons. They have their kit ready. They just jump onto minibuses or whatever, and they get down there absolutely as soon as they can. But sometimes it can take enough time. Remember, you can lose a prison in the space of a few hours. It's quite easy to lose a prison.
Yeah, it was. I know when the police came down to Shepton Mallet to do the training there, they'd been told that they had to do the training. They wanted them to train in terms of doing the riot control in a prison environment. So if they had to support, because the numbers of officers were reducing in a prison, then they were trained to do it. So they came to Shepton to do it, and they actually brought one of the senior trainers in the prison service that helps train the tornado team to train the police service to do it. And I watched 200 police officers on the day working in 3-man teams, learning how to do this. We've got loads of footage, and we are allowed to share it. So over the coming weeks, we will start sharing some of that footage so you can see it. But it is absolutely crazy to see 200 police officers basically descending on a prison wing and trying to stop other police officers who are obviously attacking and playing the roles of prisoners. So
well, unfortunately, when a prison is running normally on a normal routine, there are nowhere near that many staff available to come running to situations. On a wing of this size, which used to have anywhere from 330 to 350 prisoners, when all the prisoners are out of their cell on what we call association, going to the showers, cleaning their cells, going to the staff, being with their mates, you might have noticed here that the little football table, and there's ping pong or table tennis and snooker tables. Basically, there are only, there be 8 initial staff on this wing to manage those prisoners. 2 officers on each landing. So that's 8 to 350 potentially. Yes, there was a senior officer that used to be in the office. They're in charge of the wing and the staff. And there used to be one officer that used to be located down in our little segregation unit, which is just a small area down at the far end. So in total, there were 10 staff. So the numbers are still 35 to 1. So you can see. And this notion somehow that you can go around and make prisoners do what you want them to do, and that you can actually dominate them and just every time bark orders. It doesn't work like that. Prisoners need to be managed, and they're all managed in a different way. And all staff will learn those skills, and the longer you're in the job, the better those skills become, and you learn to manage staff. You have to bear in mind, many prisoners that come to jail just want to do their time and go home, and they don't want to cause you any particular grief. They just want to crack on.
Just
there are always going to be those prisoners that are always going to kick against the system because they just do. They just do, and we'll manage that one way or the other.
Just going to do my bird, boss, and I'm out. That's it.
Go on.
Just going to do my bird, And I'm done.
Do me bird.
Do my bird. Somebody's asked whether modern prisons, so Dave's asked whether modern prisons have the same sort of doors, but I think modern prisons tend to have electronic doors now, don't they, on the cells?
I'm not aware that there are actually electronic doors. There are a couple of prisons that were right back in the 70s that came out on one they called the electronic system. And Long Lartin Prison, which was a maximum security prison when it was built, had what they call the electronic door system. And it was operated usually during the night, particularly, because when prisoners were all away in their cells, they didn't have any toilets. Even when the prison was built in 1974, I believe it was, there were no toilets in there. So what they could do is press a button on the inside of their cell, and the electronic system would sweep around, and it would unlock that door. Now, if you pressed the bell second, it would put you in a line, in a queue. So if you were 6 people pressing that bell when they come into their cells, you would be queued up automatically by the system. I can't remember exactly now, but I think the prisoner would come out, and they had about 10 minutes, might be slightly longer, to go to the toilet that was at the end of the landing, and then, the landings were all locked off, of course, and then come back to their cell. When they come back to their cell, they would have to shut the door, and then once the door was shut again, the electronic system would relock that door, make sure that it was locked, the prisoners behind it, and then it would unlock the next door. That was way back at the center. I'm not sure whether they still operate that system. Pretty sure they put toilets in cells now anyway. And I'm not convinced. I don't think Berwyn has got the electronic door locking system. It may have. I don't know. It's pretty.
Yeah, we can check in. We've got some connections at Berwyn. So
yeah, there is somebody that I know from this prison that now works at HMP Berwyn, so I might just message him and just see what the situation. But I'm pretty sure it's still on. I prefer to have the old key system where you unlock a door, personally, because when you do that and you go round in the morning, every time you unlock those doors, you're looking into those cells. You're making sure everything is okay. And I think that's a good thing. With an electronic system, you could be in the office sorting bits of paperwork out, not paying attention. The doors all click and unlock, and it may be a while before you get round to look in. And you may end up bumping into something you really, really don't want to be bumping into. So you can see, unlocking in the morning. There are some high-risk times when prisoners are likely to attempt to take their own lives. And very often that can be early hours of the morning. One of the biggest fears for night staff in my career, and I know many staff say, is when we do the first count at 6 o'clock in the morning. Every single cell that you flip that switch, you flick these things to have a look in, every single cell, in the back of your mind, you may be just there conscious that somebody may have attempted to take or already taken their own life. And it's been known to have happened when there's been another prisoner in the cell. While the one prisoner's asleep, the other prisoner has taken. So you can see. So 6 o'clock, when staff are looking in, they're always looking for that. And then the next count comes a little bit later when the day staff come on. They'll do that again because there's a high risk between them. 2 hours. That prisoner may be awake, wake up. And sometimes it may be a call for help. Sometimes they may do it thinking that staff are going to be there to unlock the door. And it doesn't work like that. Staff don't always go round a wing the same way as they used to. Sometimes they might do the 4s first, then they might come on and do the 3s first, or the 2s, depending on where they are, and they might go round the other way. Minutes make a difference. So you can see, so they are the higher risk times that you can see in prisoners behind cell doors.
Okay.
Right, I was going to move on unless you
I was going to say time to move on. I was just going to point out that the door lock behind you can see, because we've obviously had all the locks taken off the doors. There's a number of different types of locks in a prison that they touch on the tours. That's actually a fake one that was put on by a production company, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I'll do it anyway.
They generously donated it to us.
Well, it got left. So
possibly unawares.
You're not allowed to have prison locks. You're just not allowed to have them for obvious reasons. But we have got one where a production company, a very top-end production company, had one professionally made by the actual lock company that make them for the MOJ, for prisons, had them bought here. It works. It doesn't have a key turn for it. It has all the other bits apart from the key turn. And they had 7 of them, I think, when they were here, and one of them did get left, and it is here on a cell. So if you're here, you can come and basically play with an actual prison lock and see how they work. When you walk into the cell, the door shuts and this huge bolt just, and you're not getting out of that cell.
Interestingly about locks, when they closed this prison, all these locks were taken off the doors. They're not thrown away. They actually go back to a big central stores where there are many other systems. Every prison has a different set of locks.
Yeah.
So the key that I have here fits all these doors, but it does not fit in the next prison. However, you can get things called key compromises in prison. And that's basically if they find something like perhaps a prisoner has fashioned a key that might fit any one of these doors, cell doors, wing doors. If they find, sometimes you can find a bar of soap where they've tried to take an imprint of a key, little drawings. Some prisoners are very good. That's why you'll never see keys. Can you see there? You'll never see keys on view. You'll see on the TV programs they're walking around with keys bouncing all over the place. They're always out of sight because some prisoners, past masters, have been able to view things and it wouldn't take them long to fashion the picture, and they'll do it until they get it right.
And we'll be able to see when you get into the servery because we can't see it from where you're stood now, but your keychain won't reach the floor, will it?
I don't know anymore.
Shouldn't do.
I've shrunk a lot in the last 10
Well,
years.
that is true, yeah. But your keychains never touch the floor because
it's
the
not
idea
really
that
on the floor.
the keys shouldn't hit the floor in case they break and you don't notice.
I always remember the old chief officer when we used to do what they call the stick and whistle parade many, many years ago. You'd have to get your baton out, you'd have to get your whistle out. He wanted to see those two safety items that you got with you rather than the Sun newspaper coming out of your pocket. And very often, sometimes he'd ask you to drop your keys. Because some staff had got keys that long, they'd trail around the floor behind them. They changed the key chains that they were originally given. And you'd have to shorten them for different heights, of course. Stuff like that. So, yeah. Yeah. This is the great thing about live. We have a postman delivering a parcel for us. I only hope it's for me, sir.
I'm more curious about how he managed to get past the ticket office to get into the middle of the prison. Right. Well, anyway, it's just as secure as it's always been. Should we? There's quite a lot of quite a lot of questions actually coming in about about food. So that's probably
right.
A good time
Let's make our way. We're going to go across to what is more commonly known now as the Servery. It's had a number of different uses over its time, which I'll show to you when we get into the building.
Into the room, sir. You're in the building.
Right, here we are now.
Just take
me up, Joel?
Yeah, just take a couple of steps forward so you come into the light.
Sorry?
Come forward. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely good there. So yeah,
excellent.
All good. It was all yours.
Okay, we'll step back to the Victorian times. You can see on the cameras the beams because these were originally cells. Victorians wouldn't have, they'd have probably had a small place somewhere to make the very minimal food that prisoners would have been getting. So these were originally cells. When I came to this prison, it had been changed some years before that. It was actually known as the scullery, and this is where all the utensils that prisoners would be given. They used to have steel trays, steel preformed trays, stainless steel, and all the other bits and pieces that had been used to serve food. There used to be prisoners working the scullery, cleaning all that equipment up ready for the next meal time. And then we moved on because there came laws out, because we used to serve the food out on the landings, just on sort of benches laid up there. And obviously the health and safety came in and said, you can't serve food like that anymore, anywhere. You'll notice in cafeterias and restaurants, everything's covered in glass. So we changed this into our servery, and it was all glassed in food. And so even the prisoners were required to wear hats and gloves, proper health and safety. And the prisoners, in a prison like Shrewsbury, prisoners were locked up for their meals because on landings there wasn't enough staff and there isn't the physical place for prisoners to eat out in what they call association. So basically they were locked up, that's when we count the prison, and we did what they call a controlled unlock. Prisoners were brought out so many at a time, whatever landing we're doing first. They would come down, they would come in through the door that I've just walked in through there. They would pick up their meal, which has been pre-ordered. Their meal would be pre-ordered a week in advance. They used to fill their forms in for the meals they wanted 1 week. Usually put the sheets in on a Saturday and start getting those meals from a further week. It was pretty normal to say what you ordered is what you got. So they came in, they picked up their meals, made their way through, and they went out through that door just there. Oh, the non-existent marker that Joel's left for me, he wants me to stand on. It's a tile, one of another 5,000 in here. So so they used to come in through this door, pick up their meals and go out through the door at the far end. They used to come down the one set of stairs and go up the other. So we get this continuous rolling number of bodies coming in to get their meals. And they went upstairs and they got locked into their cells to eat their meals. We didn't have what they call association dining as such. So, all diets are catered for in prisons. They never used to be. When I first come to prisons in the 1970s, the diet had some consideration, but really it was very much it's a take it or leave it menu. To be honest with you, these days everything's catered for. All religious diets are catered for, and diets such as veganism, vegetarianism, and all those other diets. Medical diets are catered for. So if you're gluten-free or wheat intolerant, there'll be a little slip from the doctor going to the kitchen, and those meals will take account. Your meals need to be gluten-free or wheat intolerant. So everything's catered for. Shrewsbury had a reputation of some of the best prison food in the country. Some of the best prison food in the country. And that's from the mouths of prisoners, not just staff. I bumped into many prisoners still today. I bumped into many prisoners in other prisons, and they've always said, Shrewsbury, there's nothing wrong with the food, boss. And they used to say, whatever we said about lots of prisons, the grub was always good in Shrewsbury. Cooked by prisoners, supervised and trained by staff. So it was good. I remember taking a prisoner once, and he was in hospital for a couple of days having an operation with me and a colleague, and he was there ticking off the menu. As you do. And he said, look at this, boss, this is a life, get a menu, choose your meal. And he chose, I think it was sort of mincemeat, like cottage pie, I think it was put down as. And when it turned up on the table, there was this blob of mince in the middle and a tiny blob of potato on the top. And he looked at me, this is God's true, he looked at me and he said, boss, I'll never complain about prison food again. So just as an example. So yeah, there are some prisons in the country, I think about 5, that operate restaurants called the Clink. I know there was one in Brixton. I know there's a few. I can't remember where they all are now. And people that live in those areas can actually go, and it's in a restaurant style. They will be served restaurant quality food at a very good price, because profits are not allowed to be made through the prison system particularly. And it's a system there for training prisoners, not just in how to cook. Some are excellent cooks and chefs. Others would be how to run the business, how to manage money, how to do those business side and the management side of running restaurants and cafeterias. And they're all qualified, trained. So they can go out after their time and hopefully gain good employment in that industry. So there are 5, I believe, at this moment in time been operated. I'm not sure. Is there anything else, Joel, you want me to cover on that one?
No, you're there, but there's lots of different questions coming in. So if you...
I'll come back on the camera.
Do you want to get back on the camera?
I'll come and join that young lady there.
That's fine. You'll have to turn the camera... You'll
camera's
have to
around.
You'll have to turn the camera around.
I'm here.
Okay, let me just...
There we go.
Hold on, you got to wait for me now. Hold on. Okay, cool, I'm back. So Jess has asked a couple of questions, actually. She's asked about, do prisoners don't obviously cook their own food, as you've just been through. What about utensils? So would prisoners have utensils that they would get with their trays, and then would those be signed out, or would they have their own utensils? How did that work?
As far as I'm aware, prisoners still get issued with plastic knives and forks and spoons. Although they get a plastic plate, a plastic little pudding bowl, and they used to get a plastic mug, all blue. However, there are in prisons now, we operate a system called the enhanced IEP system. If a prisoner is an enhanced prisoner, that's the better behaved prisoners, the best behaved prisoners, they're entitled to hold ceramic plates, ceramic mugs, but still plastic knives and forks. So there are prisons, unfortunately with ceramics, they are a potential weapon again. As you can well imagine, crack open a plate and you've got yourself a relatively nasty weapon. But that's the way the system operates at the moment. So they do get ceramic other than knives, forks and spoons.
Yeah, and then there's a question here from, there's 2 questions actually, one from Kerry and one from Mary. So Kerry asking, were there ever any problems in the canteen when they were cooking, so really in the kitchen? And then Mary has asked whether they had to earn the right to work in the kitchen.
Well, obviously the catering staff that work in kitchens only want those that are willing to work, because you can't afford to have lazy people working in your kitchen. Things have to be done on time and presented in a good way. So to some degree, the staff that worked in the kitchen had a big say whoever came in. There's what they call a labour board, where different management levels decide on where prisoners are going to go and work, if they're working, if there's any jobs. But as far as the kitchen goes, the kitchen also have a big say. You can't afford to have people in there. When you think about it, prisoners there use knives, and I'm talking about butcher's knives. I'm talking about some of the big, huge knives, 8, 9, 10 inches long, very, very sharp. So you have to be very sure of the people you've got working in there. And to my mind, at this moment in time, there's never been an issue with that while I've been at Shrewsbury. However, there was a time many years ago when we used to use live yeast, because we used to make our own bread. Most bread in prisons these days is bought in. And there might be the odd one or two prisoners that were trying to sneak the yeast out of the kitchens, obviously into the cells, because they were using it to brew up their home brews, their hooch, as it was in those places. So they would use fruit. Remember, prisoners are given fruit. They sometimes can buy fruit through the canteen system, and therefore they're going to use the fruit and the yeast to brew up their own brews and stuff like that. And anything else they can get their hands on, as it happens. But
and Darren's asking whether in the kitchen and the serveries, were prisoners overseen and taught by prison officers, or did they bring in chefs?
If you go back far enough, when I first joined the service for many, many years, there were always prison officers that were actually employed inside the kitchens. However, many of them would have come into that job with skills already from the outside world. They may have already been chefs. They might have been ex-forces people that are accustomed to cooking meals for large amounts of people. And then bit by bit, it was privatised. They didn't get rid of the officers, but as they moved on, they replaced them with what they call civilian staff. And many of those civilian staff would come in with those skills already. And there are some prisoners that come in that had got those skills. In our time, we've had prisoners come in here that are actually bakers, butchers, and they go, and all things being equal security-wise, they were likely to get a job there, because they could help and assist in other prisoners learn those skills as well. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why in Shrewsbury the food was good. We used the skills as they came to us.
That was the best paid job in the prison as well, isn't it?
Sorry?
Best paid job in the prison.
By prison standards, trust me, the best paid job in the prison. But they did work 7 days a week on what they call a rota system. So there was none of this, I'm only working Monday to Friday. They would work sometimes till 6 o'clock at night and gone. They would work very early in the morning. Not all of them, but they get some 4 or 5 prisoners out very early at 6:30 in the morning to go to the kitchens to prep up for that morning session. And they would be working through Saturdays and Sundays as well. So they worked on a shift system, basically. Where they might start work a little bit later in the morning, start very early in the morning, and work through Saturdays and Sundays on a rota base.
This is an interesting one that's coming from Janet, and it's interesting to me because I've spent a lot of time yesterday with a different group, and it's about perception and reality, because Janet's asked, did prisoners do food hygiene, i.e. wash their hands before touching food and eating food? And before you answer that, the reason I sort of come at it from an angle of perception and reality is the perception is because they're in prison, for some reason hygiene's gone out the window, or for some reason they wouldn't take care, and it's almost that kind of, I guess, that Hollywood feel that prisoners must make food and spit in it into other prisoners and do things like that is kind of the perception, but it's not the reality, is it?
No, one of the things that with prisoners, when they collect their food, we personally, me and I know many other staff do, we encourage prisoners to be as clean, as hygienic as possible. That's for their benefit and for everyone else's benefit in a prison. Once they collect their meal and take it back to that cell door and it's shut, we have no idea of the hygiene that's taking place behind that cell door. None whatsoever. They might have put their food down and gone to the toilet that's in the cell. They may not have washed their hands, or they might be fastidiously clean and tidy. I'd like to think that most prisoners are. Now we've got COVID-19 going on, and we've got a completely different regime in the prison. Obviously, there's a bigger emphasis now on prisoners and staff of keeping themselves at distance and cleaning and hygiene and all that, once again for everybody's benefit. But no. As far as adulterating food in kitchens, I've no doubt that it's happened. I'm not going to stand there and say it never happens,
absolutely,
because it's difficult. And one of the things, many prisons, they might operate a small wing somewhere else where you've got prisoners held because they cannot mix with the main, because they're going to be at risks for all kinds of reasons, on protection, because of the offences they've committed, or because they're in debt, whatever. And there is a danger that those meals that are going into that kitchen may be adulterated. In Shrewsbury, the way we got round that was when all the food was cooked, it was all put into the trays, left on the top, and a member of staff and prisoners used to come in and they would randomly select the trays that they were going to take out onto that wing. So therefore there was always a risk they might take the trays that are good, and any trays that were adulterated might end up back on this wing, of course. So we thought that that was quite a good measure. I can't speak for other prisons, of course, I really can't. I'd like to think it doesn't happen, common decency, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, Steve, who was a prisoner here, has commented to say when he worked in the kitchen making the food, it was best job there, and absolutely they took great care in doing it. Somebody's asked how much they got paid in the kitchens.
Off the top of my head now, I can't really remember. Steve might remember this, of course, but I believe it got up to about close to, I think when we were here, about 18 or 20 pound a week. It might not be quite that much because times have moved on. And that's one of the best paid jobs. The average pay for prisoners can run anywhere between about £8 up to about 13 or 14 pound a week, depending if they're in the workshops and all that. That might change now, bearing in mind Shrewsbury's been closed for 7 years, but I just don't see the government just start giving people inflation pay rises.
It doesn't happen outside a prison, so I doubt it happens inside.
You have to bear in mind when prisoners get their pay, they're entitled to spend all the money that they earn. They're also entitled to spend what they call private cash. So they can add to it. So if you only get paid, let's say £6 a week, you can add money to that. But there's a limit on what you can spend, depending on whether you're a basic level, a standard level, or an enhanced level, depends on how much that prisoner's entitled to spend. Enhanced, obviously, can spend more of all their wages and more of their private cash. But there are overall limits at the top end of how much prisoners can spend in things. And they can spend money on what they call one-off items. So if they want to buy a set of trainers because their old ones have gone to go in the gym, they can buy them through the catalogue, something like the Argos system, and they might be 60 or 70 pounds. They are permitted to make that one-off purchase as a separate purchase to their general canteen spends once a week.
It's Amazon orders now, and they're delivered to their cells by drones. So,
I'm not quite sure what's been delivered by drones, to be honest with you.
Steve has confirmed your
most
knowledge
of it doesn't come out of Argos, I can tell you that.
Steve has confirmed your knowledge is absolutely spot on as always. £18 a week.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, might be a little bit more now.
Christmas seems to be a common theme here at the moment. So people are asking, did they get a roast dinner at Christmas, and were prisoners all allowed to eat together, or did they still have to eat in their cells on Christmas Day?
In most of my time here, prisoners still had to have that meal behind their closed doors because there just wasn't the staff on the landings.
It's a risk, isn't it?
On Christmas Day, they would have brought staffing down to a minimum level to get as many staff off on Christmas Day as possible. So there wouldn't have been workshops or anything going on out there. No visits on Christmas Day, so you could possibly have a few extra staff around. However, they used to get up in the morning. It's one of the few, if not the only time I remember a cooked breakfast being given to prisoners. And if I remember rightly, they used to get a choice. It was either bacon or sausage, not the both. Not the both. And they would have that breakfast, and then at lunchtime they would get, as close to a traditional Christmas dinner as you can get. I don't know whether it was turkey or possibly chicken or something like that. And it was cooked with all the usual veg. They got soup and they got desserts. And then on the evening meal, which is traditional in many families, they went on to a salad. So they would get some ham, or they would get different meats, cheeses and salad, and they might get some cakes to take away with them, or whatever, crisps and fruit and stuff like that. So yeah, but as I said, Shrewsbury had a first-class reputation for food by anybody's standards, to be honest with you, by anybody's standards. I've paid for food that was worse in Shrewsbury. Seriously, I've paid for food that's worse. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, you threw me off again. I've got caught into that trap of listening and learning, and I've not read the questions. Somebody actually Jess asked whether prisoners could save up their money. I know we did cover this before, whether they could save up their money so when they left they could take it with them.
Yes, there's absolutely no obligation on prisoners having to spend their money. They can save it all or save any portion that they desire, and they will receive it on the way out. And they'll pick it up when they leave the prison. Yeah, no, there's nothing stopped that. You have to remember, I'm not sure with life sentence prisoners that have got a long time to serve. At some point, there is a requirement that they save some of that money, because when they do get out, and they might be doing 15, 20, 25 years, if they get out at that point in time, they've got at least enough money to keep them ticking over, perhaps for a month or two, until such time as they hopefully find work and full-time accommodation. Life sentence prisoners nearly always go, well, they do go to halfway houses, so they're held in hostile situations until they settle. It's a step-by-step move for prisoners, but I can't remember. The rules might have changed on that, to be honest with you.
I always find it's a really sobering thought, the idea of doing 15, 18, 20 years in prison, because the world is moving so fast now. I mean, technology moves so fast, everything is just developing so quickly, that the idea of being out of that for even 10 years, 15 years and coming back, it's so much is going to have moved on. Trying to keep up with that and get back onto just keeping up with everything is going to be hard.
A lot of people do get confused, and I see it on Facebook, and you'll see a prisoner's got a life sentence, and they go serving 15 years, and some people say, oh, well, they only do half of that, or they'll be out in 15 years. That's not strictly true. A life sentence really is a life sentence. I believe it's actually 99 years long. And what happens is a prisoner will have to serve a minimum of 15 or 20 or 25 before they're considered to go out on license. And it's a consideration. It is not a guarantee that people get released. I've known prisoners in my time that have got a 15-year tariff date, as it's called, and they're still in prison at 20 years and 21, 22 and 23 years. If they do get out on a license, they're on that license until the day they die. So there is access for the parole boards to call them back to prison if necessary. There's no courts, there's no judges or juries. The police arrest them and bring them straight back to a prison. So you can see that's how that works. The other sentence that people get confused about is that that's a life sentence. The other one's known as a determinate sentence. So if they're not given a life sentence and they're given 25 years, there is then an automatic expectation that they will serve 12 and a half of those years before they become at release point. They can serve longer depending if they commit any other offences while they're in prison, and it is possible to get out slightly earlier, and that's on a thing called HDC, electronic tagging. But that's a matter for governors and parole boards and others that decide now whether that's an appropriate measure to take at the time. So there's determinate sentences where generally you're serving half that time, and there's the life sentence where you get a potential to get out after X amount of time that the judge sets, the tariff date as they call it.
Yeah, thank you, Officer G. And it's interesting you say that, and you bring up the IPPs and determinants, because just to my left, you can't see her over here, but is the other half of our business, is my co-owner and director, who was actually a prison psychologist who worked very much doing that job in working with prisoners and doing behavioural change programs and identifying whether they should be due for release, or making recommendations to parole boards and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I'll put her in front of a mic in a sec. You two can just.
I know it's a little bit deeper, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it is a complicated thing to manage and all that. When you get to that, looking at prisoners being released, very often it's not based on what they've done. You don't decide whether somebody stops in prison because of what they've done. You're looking about what are their risks when they get out. So it's a risk factor about when they get released, what are their risks of committing these crimes again. So really, people say, well, because they've done that crime, they shouldn't be allowed to be released. Now, there are some prisoners that are serving all their lives in prison, of course. They're all literally got no tariff dates at all. But it's always based on risk. They go, what is the risk if we release this prisoner today? And they might go, yes or no, or we'll think about it in another couple of years' time. We'll think about it in another couple of years' time. And it's based on risk to society when they get out. Yeah, may not be everybody's ideal situation, but that's the way that the criminal justice system operates at this moment in time.
Okay, so perfect. I'll move on to the next question. But if there are any different questions around prisoners' releases and such like that, then throw them up there. Obviously, we've got Officer Goodwin here. Emma's here as well, who used to work in the prison service. So we've got a good knowledge base here today to be able to cover those kind of things. Okay, radios. This is one that I've been asked about 3 or 4 times today. Were there alarms on the radios? And the radios officers had. I know, again, it's a fantastic piece of kit, a very expensive piece of kit. Can you just talk people through how your radios worked effectively?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going back in time, radios are what they were. They were just, we used to have two-piece radios originally, a battery down one side, and they were the most efficient things that we'd ever had. Then we went on to the one-piece radios, and more recently, probably over the last 20 years, the radios, not only are they radios, they're also telephones. You can receive text messages on them, you can sing, and they also have personal alarms built onto them now, because staff members may not be in a place where the general alarms are to press the general alarms, which are dotted around the prison. They may not be able to access their whistle because they might be restricted by that. They can just get down and press that button. And if they are knocked over, there is a system that automatically unlocks the radio, so you don't need to touch it. You can just shout and it'll set the alarms off, and it will just basically you can shout and let staff where you know you are without touching the radio yet. And they're expensive bits of kit, as you can well imagine. They're not cheap. So it is much safer in that time. Oddly enough, and I'm going to say this if I might, I'm going to step out of the British prison service and step back to the Australian prison service. I worked in Sydney, in Long Bay Jail for 7 years, way back in the late 70s, early 80s. And they didn't have radios as such, but they had an alarm system built onto the belts. And you'd take this extra piece of belt, an expander, and put it into your own belt system. So if you had a problem on the landing where prisoners have got their arms around you and you can't use them, you can expand your stomach, and it used to expand the belt, and it set the alarms off to the transponders on the landing, and staff in the control room knew exactly where you were. And they were using those in 1979, long before we did, but there you go. Yeah, so just a subtle difference between the two. But whether they still use them or not, I don't know.
Sorry, you caught me out again. I've never heard that one before, so it's new. TVs. So again, somebody's asked about, I know we did cover it a few weeks ago, but if you can just touch on it very briefly, how many hours could prisoners watch a TV for, and how many channels did they have?
There's no restrictions on prisoners watching TV if they're behind their doors, none whatsoever. So during the night particularly, they don't have any list. There's no such system as lights off anymore and putting the power off. They can watch a TV. In my experience in Shrewsbury, prisoners had access to about, if I remember rightly, 5 or 6 channels. They didn't have Netflix and Now TV and Sky. I don't know what it is today, but when we were here with TVs, I think it was BBC One, possibly BBC Two, Channel 4, ITV, E4 Films, or perhaps one other, but they were limited. There were about 5 or 6 channels that prisoners could actually watch. But if they're not working during the day, because there is no work for them, or they're ill or whatever, there's nothing stopping them watch their TVs whenever they're in their cells. Yeah, there's no restriction on that. I do remember quite often if the prisoners would be going through, and I'd be checking on the Prisoners on Association, and they say, "Come on in, boss, look at this," and I go, "What?" And they'd show me the TV, and what was that morning show on with this? The guy, they took him off TV because of, forgot his name. Jeremy Kyle, thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Brilliant,
See,
brilliant.
This is why we miss an audience all these weeks. We miss the audience.
It's an age thing, guys. It's an age thing. Jeremy Kyle, and there was Jeremy Kyle on TV, and I said, "What? You're not watching this stuff, surely?" And he said, "No, look who sat there next to so-and-so." And in actual fact, it was a prisoner that had been in this prison only some weeks before, been released, and there he was, sat on Jeremy Kyle. Yeah, I thought, wow. But no. So there's no particular restrictions on them watching TVs, to be honest with you.
Okay. There's some questions coming in about Charles Bronson, but to be honest, I don't think there's a huge amount of point in asking you, because I know your answer will be you don't tend to give your personal opinions on these things and such like that. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions whilst we're here. I'll throw it to the floor for the few people that are here. It's nice and easy for me. We're getting there, Mr. G. We're basically at the end. We're pretty much on our hour. Wow. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to...
I was just in my stride then.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. I'm going to see if any more questions come in. Someone's asked about the last attack that you witnessed here, and did prison officers ever get attacked here? And again, I know we've covered that, so I don't know if you want to just cover that very briefly.
The last attack that I witnessed here, I was actually in the middle of. I was walking on the next landing above, and it was just literally above me. I was walking up the landing just here, and there were 2 prisoners fighting by the office, and they both got broomstails. They were literally facing up to each other. And don't ask me why. I got round there. Obviously, you're shouting. You raise your voice to make other staff aware that something's going on. I come round, and don't ask me why I did this, but because really it's not the most sensible thing to do. But sometimes your actions take over your thinking. And I literally stepped between the both of them, hands on chest, apart from the both of them. Now, these guys were in their 30s and I was in my 50s at the time, and I stood there, and within seconds, and I mean literally, because other staff were coming to the scene, within about probably 5 to 10 seconds, other staff were there moving the prisoners away. And when they moved them away, I sort of sat there and went, whew, what a daft thing to do. These people are trying to hit each other with with broom handles and stuff, and I'm standing in the middle of it. So sometimes you do things automatically without giving it a lot of thought. However, in saying that, they were taken down to the segregation unit, and they got the next day they got adjudicated on, and the governor decided on their punishment. I can't remember what. And then they came back onto the landings. And both of them at separate times came up to me and they said, "I hope you don't think you were at any risk, boss." They said, "Mr. G," I said, "you were okay. We wouldn't have hit you." And they both said it at different times. So it wasn't about me. It wasn't a personal thing. They were just having, they were friends in actual fact, but things come to a head in prisons and they were having a bit of a set too. And I think they were back to being friends again, to be honest with you. Pressures can be strange things in prisons where things can build, you settle the air. So they both actually come to me and said, "We wouldn't hit you, boss." I said, "Well, thank God for that." Thanks very much. But no. Okay. So that was the last one, and that was probably only about 2 years before we closed. So about 2012, 2013.
So we're just going to do a couple of minutes. I'm actually going to see if I can persuade my business partner stood to my left to wander down to the far end of the wing and jump onto the other microphone. She's looking at me like, "Oh, I don't know," because I think it'd be really interesting, because Emma, who you'll see in a second, worked at Shepton Mallet Prison as a psychologist, and actually I'll ask Officer Goodwin in a sec to go stand a metre away so you can see them both. But Shepton was a very different type of prison in the sense of it worked, it had behavioural change programs. So I'll ask those guys just to talk very little bit about that in a second, because we haven't covered much of Shepton, but we are going to go down at some point, aren't we, Officer G, and do a live in Shepton whilst they get set up. Laura, I think you asked a question about the alarms in C Wing. If you're talking about the alarms that are going off at the moment, in terms of on the cameras that we have live overnight with Most Haunted, that is just a fault in our fire alarm system, and it just comes through to Lauren and I, and then we come and turn it off basically. But it's nothing too much of a problem when it goes off, as you're seeing there. Officer G, I think if you nip down to, let's have a quick look, you can go down into the same camera as Emma, and you can stand opposite sides. So, Ems, if you go that way, perfect.
You're not going to ask us to do a duet here, are you?
I don't know. Let me bring Emma's microphone up so we can actually hear it. So Emma is the other half of the business you don't normally see, because I'm generally jumping on the limelight. Emma was a prison psychologist before we moved into running this business together, and has helped us develop the corporate programs that we operate. I'm looking at Harriet here. So our team building behind bars was very much built with a psychology angle in terms of behavioural change and such like that. And then Graham and Emma, who are both stood there, are responsible for our educational programs in terms of making sure that those have been built and put together to get the best delivery from a tour perspective, history perspective, and also a psychology perspective as well. Can you guys, I know I'm throwing you into it, so apologies a little bit, just give us a little bit of background on the difference between the type of prison Shepton was to Shrewsbury in terms of obviously the category and the behavioural programs and stuff, and again why Shepton was rated as one of the best prisons in the country when it closed.
You know what kind of Shepton was?
Well, Shepton was Cat C, but it was life sentence prisoners only. So it was a smaller establishment than this one. There was only 188, I think, roughly, somewhere around there, prisoners. But everybody there was on a life sentence. So it was actually quite a quiet prison. And like I was going to say, there's a lot of kind of cooperation between staff and prisoners.
Yeah. They would all be single cells too, wouldn't they?
A majority of them were
single cells, which is not uncommon for life sentence prisoners because of the length of time they're doing. It would seem you not want to be putting them in with other people and have all those kind of issues you could well do without.
Yeah, I mean, I worked. There was prisoners there that had been in prison for sort of 40 years. Yes. They're long-serving prisoners. So yeah, majority of them were single cell, and they tended to know the staff, and like there was a lot of, I guess, professional relationships built between them. Because
I'm going to ask this question now because I've been curious about this. It's something I think, and you'll be able to confirm it. When people get a life sentence, I imagine the first 5 years of that life sentence is probably the most difficult point in their time, about whether they may be thinking that they can't do it, they're going to take their own lives, and the whole world falls apart for them. And bit by bit, they become accustomed to it and learn to settle and accept what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. It was very much a case of a way of life, I guess.
Yes.
They knew their routine. They had the jobs that they liked. They had some great educational facilities and things like that. So it was very much a case of an established routine.
Yeah.
And some of them became very what's the word? When you
I thought it was just age folk, but obviously it's not.
No, it's
No,
the prison service that does it.
yeah, blame on that.
They do remove some of the rate to work in these jobs.
or working here, one of the two.
Institutionalised was the word I was looking for.
Yeah,
Almost,
and
it's
to be honest,
institutionalised.
sometimes staff that work in prisons for 30 or 40 years, and many do, or they used to, they don't stop in the job anywhere near as long today, we can all become a little bit institutionalised. We get used to habits and routines, and we fall into it. There is a danger with that. You can allow it to affect your thinking, because you think everything must be that way, because that's what you've always done. In my experience in long-term prisons, up in Gartree prison, which was not strictly then a life sentence prisoner, but because they were mainly serving very long sentences, in actual fact, there seemed to be a much more relaxed regime. Because I think when you're serving a very long time in prison, particularly when you've got the first 5 or 6 years under your belt, you do settle to it, and you do see you've got much more to lose than if you're serving 6 months. I came to this prison and I was really quite shocked, coming from a long-term high-security prison to a small local prison where prisoners are sometimes serving a fortnight for fines, or they're serving a couple of months, or they're on remand, or they've got a sentence of a couple of years, and it does a huge amount of more issues to manage. Because sometimes you've got prisoners only serving 3 or 4 months, they go, hey, you can't keep me any longer, and they can behave any way they like.
Yeah.
It's just it is. So long-term, as in my experience, when it goes wrong in a high-security prison, you may have serious problems. However, generally I found the regime was much more relaxed.
Yeah.
So
You certainly found it was quite, I don't know if quiet's the right word, but it was more relaxed. And I don't know if they had it here, we had a system called free flow. So
yes,
prisons were unlocked, and then there was a set movement: go to work, go to education, wherever. They'd be counted again.
Yeah.
And once everyone was happy that everyone was where they were supposed to be, then the doors were unlocked, so they could move between workshops or education and the wings freely until the lunchtime move, and then everything was kind of counted again and locked down into wings, and it would be opened again in the afternoon.
Slightly less free flow in Gartree, because they used to move from the wings and all that, but we would have staff out along the routes.
Yeah.
Because at the time it was a dispersal high security prison, not a lifers. It's now a lifers prison, and I imagine they don't line the routes anymore, because they go, no, just open the doors, off you go lads, off you go fellas, go to work, go to education. They'll just book themselves in, get checked in, counted, and we'll put the numbers right when we've got everybody settled down.
Because you've got to remember, Shepton, Mallet, they did tours, as I spoke about I think last week and the week before. They did very small group tours for professionals going into the prison service or going to probation systems, and I was fortunate enough to get onto the back of one of those tours, and that's how I kind of came up with the idea of this would make a great tourist attraction. But when I went on the tour, there were still prisoners in there, so I was wandering through, and there was Emma was on the tour, and there was another prison officer similar to yourself, Mr. G, who took us round in a group of about 6 or 7, and there were prisoners, and it was really strange to kind of walk past prisoners who you knew were prisoners, but actually it was bizarre, because they stepped away from you, and actually they stood backs to walls almost and let you kind of go past. And there was very, very little interaction, but it was very bizarre. But it was obviously safe enough to be able to walk around in that environment with members of the public like myself.
When I first joined the service in '77, I ended up being in Gloucester Prison, and you're there for a month normally, in those days, in a civilian clothes, shirt and tie, looks smart, and you go around the landings and you watch staff do their job, and you're basically just there to see whether you can live in the job, whether you want the job, or whether they think you're suitable to carry on. And I remember walking up on a landing, and I was walking down, and a couple of prisoners come up to me and said, you're not a governor, are you? Because governors wear civilian clothes in prisons. I went, no. They said, obviously, new officer, are you, boss? And I said, yeah. And they actually said to me, not a word of a lie, they said, old Mr. So-and-so there, he'll look after you, he's all right. And that was literally my second day in a prison. And that was way back in the 70s, when things were much stricter in those days than they are today, of course. Much stricter.
It's funny, I remember one of the questions I used to get asked by a lot of people was, what was it like working in prison? Do you not get scared? Is it not this? And it's like, well, no,
it's
not
the wrong
really.
Job to be in, if you're scared.
Yeah, and there was a lot of respect. there's obviously going to be issues, but there is that a lot of respect, and that's how it works.
Yeah. I think many, Peter, because they don't know the real life of prisons, they paint pictures of prisons that suit their own narrative sometimes. This is how it must be. This is how it should be, and that's not the real world. The real world is in this prison, and there are ex-prisoners on there watching this program now, and there was less tension here, and the vast majority of prisoners just wanted to get on and do their time. Yeah, you'd have your ups and downs. Remember, you've got a lot of mental health issues in prisons these days. You've got a lot of prisoners that are coming in with struggling with things like learning behaviour difficulties, and they're going to struggle to function in these very, very tight environments. When they struggle outside, they're definitely going to struggle inside. Staff have to manage that. We have to manage all that. So it's not quite, there is a more recognition of mental health in prisons than there's ever been. So yeah, all those things have to be managed.
Okay, so and I think Emma was just alluding to it there about people asking about what it was like to work in a prison, because Emma wasn't a civilian the same way. She was a civil servant, so they both worked for the prison service. They're both bound by the Official Secret Acts, so I'll have to be careful what they say in a second. But it was, to a degree, it was the fact that you were female, wasn't it? You would get people asking, what's it like to be a female working in a prison, a male prison, with predominantly sex offenders and running behavioural change programs around their offences.
Yeah, people couldn't get their head around it. Like, how can you work with prisoners? Do you not feel at risk? Do you not feel scared? And we run a behavioural program with 9-10 prisoners, and it's like, but they're there because they want to change. They're there to engage with it. I mean, I do remember doing risk assessments and going back and giving them my assessment at the end of it, recommending somebody a anger management program, and his reaction was to absolutely lose it. And it's like, kind of stepping on my point there. But you know that the bell's there, and I just, you always position yourself sensibly. So when I gave them news, I stood myself between the door and him. So therefore I was able to leave and just say, you need to go back to the wing. He was sent back to the wing, where I swiftly told the officers so that they had a heads up that he was coming back with bad news that he hadn't taken very well. So it's just managed.
I think that's the secret of good management of a prison, really, because on these wings, when I was working on that, and as did nearly all the other staff, we always said to anyone that was coming on that wasn't a prison officer working on there, please let us know that you're on this landing.
Yeah.
Please let us know that you're on, so we can just keep that little eye and ear out about for you. Don't step into cells unless you're absolutely sure, preferably not at all. Come and sit in my office, I'll go and stand on the landing. And it's that communication where you go and tell officers, keep an eye out for this, that's the problem. Shrewsbury was very good. We communicated with the education, the workshop staff, all the psychologists. We communicated with everyone, and they communicated with us. And that's good cross-party working. That's how it should be. Sometimes in very large prisons, it isn't quite so easy to do. And that's not staff's fault. That's about sometimes the whole size of the prison and the access to be able just to talk to people as you walk past.
Yeah.
Not unusual to bump into people all the time in a small prison like this from all different agencies, whereas sometimes in larger prisons it's not quite that simple to do. But
that's it. Tended to know everyone's faces. Everyone, the staff all tend to know each other, and I never went onto a wing without going via an office.
You would recognise the prisoners probably a lot more at Shepton as well, because they didn't have the same turnover of numbers. You could have 30 different new receptions in Shrewsbury in a day, and Shepton you might get 3 in a month.
Yeah, it was a very slow changing population, to the point where there was prisoners that ended up being moved on because they became too comfortable and could become more manipulative, because they start to just get so comfortable that they knew how to work different people.
Yeah.
So
there's always those risks. Of course.
Here's the last question, I think, and actually it's a biggie to finish on, but it's a really good one to finish on. And obviously I'll do the last few plugs because I can see Harriet glaring at me, tapping her watch, saying I've gone over time. And it's really actually quite a good one, because obviously, Officer Goodwin, we've been speaking to you for a fair few weeks now, getting a really good opinion from an officer. Emma's obviously from a psychology perspective, they work very closely together, obviously with behavioural change of prisoners. But do you ever feel sorry for any of the prisoners?
Who are you asking that question to?
Both of you, because you come at it from slightly different angles, but obviously the same side of the bars.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I mean by sorry for a prisoner, because sometimes you have to, when you come through these doors, you have to switch off your feelings and emotions. You can't allow that stuff to get into your head, because it might affect the judgment that you make. I've had prisoners say to me, "I didn't do this, boss. I'm innocent," and they've told me a story, and I've listened to it and went, absolutely sounds genuine. However, that's not my decision. The law has told me that you're guilty. Therefore, I must treat you as a prisoner that's guilty. If you deny that you committed this crime, I take that into account in any report that I write. And I'm pretty sure that Emma would do the same thing and go, okay, I have to mention the fact that you're not accepting the responsibility for your crime. And that's the reality of it. So, feel sorry. I look at some prisoners that have got sort of serious learning behaviour difficulties, and they're basically in prison not because they're the instigator of the crime, because they're sometimes the victim of somebody else that's put them up to the crime, that's used them and literally set them up, and they're coming in to do the time. So I can have some idea of that and go, yeah, there might be some sympathies that, however, you still made those decisions yourself. Everybody makes a choice. There are very, very, very few people in society that don't know the difference between right and wrong.
And I guess a bit
everybody knows.
I don't think sympathy would be the right word, really. I mean, you work with people who you can kind of have some understanding of how things have got to where they've got to, but it's taken that and the criminal conviction that they have and working with that.
Although I must say, I did mention this before, I do remember once we were doing drugs awareness courses, we had a round robin just to break the ice with the prisoners. They all said why and when they first started taking drugs. And this one lad sat there quietly, quiet prisoner, and he said, in actual fact, when I was 13 years old, my mother introduced me to heroin. And when she was on, because they were using younger people to do the running because it was less likely to come into attention of the police then. And literally she introduced him to heroin. She was a serious heroin addict, and he ended up being the runner, going and fetching these drugs. And eventually he got himself a very serious addiction and ended up coming to prison. So if you're asking about understanding or not, you can understand how some people, through no fault of their own, end up in those situations. This is a 13-year-old boy, and this is his mother doing this to this 13-year-old boy. So you have to sit back and go, wow, I can see there is some sympathy for that action.
Yeah, there's a chain of events that have led to a situation.
Oh, yeah, many chain of events for many prisoners, of course. But
Okay, so I think we're there because I can see Harriet tapping a watch at me. But it's really interesting. I mean, I've always found it really interesting. I know when we built the education programs that we have, that when Emma and Officer Goodwin were together in the same room, we were discussing it, we had such a wide skill set in the area, because we obviously had Officer Goodwin with years of experience in the prison service, running as an officer. I think I'm okay. You wouldn't believe who just rang. It was Trevor. But it was we have such a skill set in the room with Graham with his years of experience, obviously as a prison officer, and then Emma with her experience as a psychologist, coming together to create those programs. So we do love delivering educational programs to schools and such like that. Let me just change camera. Let me come back. Yeah, you two are off now. It's fine. I'll turn your mics down. Okay. Everyone's been asking. Yes, Officer Goodwin has had a haircut. He is rocking a new hairstyle. I think we're pretty much there for the plugs. I don't think I need to do too much. I've obviously talked about the fact that we're open, guided tours restart from the 18th. So obviously we do those. We'll be restarting school tours, obviously when schools start back in September. Our activities are back, our events are back, so everything's running. So do have a look. Either website for Shepton Mallet Prison is sheptonmalletprison.com, or Shrewsbury Prison is shrewsburyprison.com. And we are looking at obviously how we're going to do these lives going forward. We haven't confirmed where we're going to do the one next week, but we will do, and we'll post that. But obviously in the meantime, do continue to send us messages and share everything, and we will speak to you. Well, we'll be back next week, won't we, Graham, for Officer G for...
Absolutely.
Perfect, right.
Okay. Where is all this material?